Welcome to the Athletic Edge podcast. And I just had a conversation with Coach Tyler, the jump coach, and we spoke about technique and the importance of technique and also training. But not only that, we also spoke about the mental aspect of training. So you guys make sure to watch the video so you guys can learn.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, I appreciate having me on. But yeah, so my name is Coach Tyler Ray. I am the founder of a company called Project Pure Athlete. Been kind of within this industry of, we'll call it like vertical jump training now for this is my second decade. So this is my 20th year. I'll be 40 years old this year, so we're trying to keep it looking nice, but every year is chipping away at it. But I've been doing it for a little while. Probably a little bit better known amongst the social media space as vertical jump technique guy. So like I can more famously like work with people over a very short period of time and help them to kind of develop a little bit more efficiency in their jump, a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more understanding of what vertical jumping is, the shapes and
Yeah.
positions the body needs to, to find to be able to be as efficient as possible off the ground. And then obviously from a training standpoint, getting people in the gym and getting them progressively stronger over time. So, I'm probably by trade a strength coach when I first started, and then I moved a little bit more so over my career into a specialty coaching role where I work with
Mm-hmm.
people kind of all over the globe. So whether I'm flown in to work on contract or people fly out to work with me, this is my little kind of like home compound here. So people kind of call it the lab. So people try to come into the lab and get some work done. So
Your lab looks pretty great from what I'm seeing.
yeah, it's all right, man. I see like if I turn it here, you can see
Yeah.
got the basketball net over the shoulder here. This has
You
been a
still dunking,
lifetime.
coach?
Yeah, you know what? I can still dunk, man. I was a pro dunker for 8 years.
Wow.
So that like I kind of came from the world of track and field initially. So high school, I was like a multi-sport athlete. Track and field was kind of the one I fell most in love with as I was transitioning out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
Competed for the University of Windsor here in Canada for 5 years. So we were five-time national champions through that span that I was there. So thankfully, I was on board when that school had its kind of like legacy run,
Mm-hmm.
and I was lucky enough to be a part of that for the entire time I was there. So as a multi-event athlete, so I did all the events, man. Yeah, all the
Hey man,
events.
that's awesome because I'm also a track guy.
Yeah.
I was a long triple jumper. Honestly, I started off as a distance runner from like 7th to 11th grade. I was a
Oh,
distance runner,
back.
but I sucked at it. And then like my last year, I switched to jumping, and it was like I was going to the state championships, and I'm like, oh my God, I wasted so much time. But luckily for me, I was able to go to college and jump there as well. Now,
That's amazing, man.
yeah, no, really, it was a great time. But honestly, so you spoke about technique, how you're a technique coach. Now, going on your page, I see your athletes, and to be honest, I'm also like a jump fanatic, or
Mm-hmm.
even like technique, two foot jumping, and they have beautiful, beautiful technique. Now, that and a lot of athletes, a lot of people don't know like just the impact of technique alone.
Mm-hmm.
They think you just have to get stronger, get more explosive. And I always say the fastest way to increase your vertical jump or just jump further in track and field is technique. That might be like the most instant improvement right there.
Yeah.
Now, can you talk to me about how you really zoned in on technique and what you do with your athletes to really help them, jump higher and improve technique and become more efficient athletes?
Yeah, I mean, like I fell in love with jumping as like a young kid. I've been
Hmm.
fascinated with the art of jumping. I think where a lot of people spent time watching the end result. So whether it was like a dunk, they wanted to see the finish, or whether it was a long jump, they wanted
Hmm.
to see how far. I was really dialed into like how they got there, right? Like what are those front end mechanics that are allowing them to be able to do what they're doing and kind of create the highlights. So the fascination started very early, uh,
Hmm.
getting through track and field and into the world of professional dunking. When I kind of transitioned from, we'll call like a 1 foot jumper into more of a 2 foot jumper, I had
Interesting.
to, yeah, I had to, like I was a pretty proficient jumper. Like I was probably not on your level in terms of like long jump as like an individual event, but I did pretty well in long jump and high jump. So like I understood what it took to propel a body horizontally and
Mm-hmm.
vertically through the lens of high jump. But when it came to 2 foot jumping, that was something that, there in my mind was different moving parts, and I was trying to figure out like if it related to 1 foot jumping. If so, what did that mean? And when I mean, after spending years and years and years just dissecting thousands of jumps, I mean, you will be hard pressed to find someone that has seen as many jumps and analyzed as many jumps as I have. And what I realized is that no matter if you're jumping off 1 foot or jumping off 2 foot, the demands on the body from an efficiency and technical standpoint are almost identical. What we're trying to do is really create the presence of horizontal momentum and
Mm-hmm.
redirect that momentum in some fashion, whether it's steeply, off 1 foot in high jump, whether it's a little bit more horizontally in the realm of long jump and triple jump. And what that means is we need to start learning where the relationships of points of our body as compared to the contact points on the floor. And those give us a
Mm-hmm.
lot of windows into we call takeoff vectors and where the athlete will be propelled in the air. So when I work with an athlete, what I'm really looking for is the lowest hanging fruit kind of immediately, right?
Yeah.
So having watched a lot of jumps, having jumped at a very high level in multiple sports myself, when I watch someone jump, I don't just see it, I really feel it. And you're probably the same in a lot of ways, where when you see someone long jump, it's like you can you're working it through in your mind as if you're the person doing the jump. You're like, that didn't feel right to me. So it's easier to access the intervention when you have such a rich understanding of what it feels like to jump at a very high level. So then
Yes,
it
of
became
course.
then it became like, how do you communicate it, right? At the end of the day, what we know inherently, other people might not know that inherently. So it's got to be communicated through a way that is understandable but repeatable. So I made it my mission to kind of create this global nomenclature and vocabulary around jumping, so that when we talk jumping to each other, we're speaking the same language, no matter if I'm talking to you or I'm talking to someone over in Europe, I'm talking to someone in Australia, or someone down the road for that matter. So it was really taking the world of track and field, which has quite a bit of language around jump technique already established. So, the
Yes.
concept of penultimate stride and hip lowering, plant and block feet, and what those really are designed to do. And then it was kind of copy and pasting it to the 2 foot world, but giving it a little bit more of a kind of well-rounded structure and system. So yeah, it was a combination of a lot of things that got me to this point. But when I get athletes in the gym, it's lowest hanging fruit first, and most oftentimes that's how do you manage your acceleration. So we're really just looking for establishing that maximum controlled velocity, and I think controlled is really that most important word there.
Yeah, and you know, you just said a lot of great things, and I really do agree with all of it, because especially the control part. Um, Now, a lot of athletes, they're very out of control when they're jumping or even when they're sprinting. A lot of athletes as well, like even just going for the approach, like let's say 2 foot jump, there's no control there. Their arms might be flailing to the side, or the legs might be going sideways. A lot of times they'll come with the approach, kill the momentum, and then they can't really jump high. They're basically acting as if they're having their own brake system,
Yeah.
because it's like if you're going and then you stop, all the momentum you just try to gain went away. Now, you also spoke about penultimate step. Now, penultimate steps is important for both long jump and just vertical jumping. Can you talk about how an athlete can develop that, but also the importance of penultimate step and what it really does for an athlete in terms of going vertical? Because when you're long jumping, you have to do a penultimate step so you can get some vertical height on it, and
Right.
then combine that with the horizontal. And then when you're doing a vertical jump, you're also doing a penultimate step to go vertical. So can you talk about the penultimate step some more, please?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the penultimate step. So the word penultimate really just means second to last, right? So in the
Mm-hmm.
context of a jump, whether we're talking 1 foot or 2 foot, we're looking at, in the case of 2 foot vertical jump, we talk about what's called the penultimate stride, right? So a stride is
Mm-hmm.
the distance between two contacts. That's a stride. When you
Yeah.
watch a 2 foot vertical jump, it's the more elongated, exaggerated stride that you would see. And what the penultimate stride is doing is really two-part. Number one is it's a preparatory step to be able to lower the athlete's center of mass or hip height, right? So you're talking
Yeah.
in the context of long jump, where a penultimate step is required to be able to give some vertical lift, to be able to not only propel the athlete horizontally, but give them enough height that they're going to be above the ground as long as they can be, right? So they don't just
Exactly.
jump
Yeah.
into the sand. And in the case of vertical
Exactly.
jumping, right? In the case of vertical jumping, it's the same thing. It's a preparatory step. It's a lowering of the hip height, and then what it also accomplishes is it's responsible for. It's really like a gatekeeper. Okay, it's really like someone standing there, and so much can go right and so much can go wrong at that point. For some athletes, the penultimate step is also responsible for creating some additional acceleration into the
Hmm.
actual takeoff moments. And then for other athletes, it's really about just maintaining speed, depending on what type of a jumper you are. And that's a whole other conversation, is really establishing what we call jump archetypes or jump types. But in the
Hmm.
case of generally understanding the penultimate, it's responsible for a brief lowering or preparation of the hip height, and then also the management of acceleration through the approach.
For me, that was something that I really had to learn when I became a long jumper. A lot of times I would jump and I would just go, like you said, go straight into straight
Same.
into the sand.
Yeah.
And it took me a while, and I would be watching videos on it. How does it work? And the moment, so this is for all the athletes out there, jumpers in any sport. The moment I improve my penultimate step, my jumps improved drastically. And for in the long jump, I was getting so much more height. Once I really improved it, I was getting so much more height because I was able to really plant very powerfully and translate my momentum, my speed, and my power into the long jump. And it's the same for when I go for a dunk. For me, I'm also like a one leg jumper and
Mm-hmm.
2 foot as well. So
Right.
I can do both of them very effectively. But when I was learning how to take off of both legs, honestly, it was very complicated at first. I spoke about how there's no control. So, and it took me a while to get it. Now, when you're training your athletes, or just generally speaking, how long does it normally take for someone to become efficient at it? Once they become efficient at it, do you ever stop training for technique?
Those are great questions. So number one, how long does it take someone to become efficient in vertical jump? So there's probably two-part answer to this. If they're
Mm-hmm.
working with me in kind of like an individual like overhaul session, I can get them to experience a higher level of efficiency pretty quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're there with them in person and you can cue and you can really be dialed into what they're doing and what they're not doing, with my experience, it's, I can get them to feel higher level efficiency probably within a first 30 minutes or so. But
Oh,
to
wow.
ingrain those patterns to become something that are accessible as on a neurological level for the foreseeable future, it does take a consistent kind of touch point with that technique throughout the week. It's like any other skill, right? And this is something that I want people to understand, is that jumping is a skill just like everything else is in sports. If you're learning how to serve a volleyball, if you're learning how to take a jump shot, if you're learning how to take a set shot, those are all repetitions that you build to be able to create efficiency and have, beautiful, better technique. So it's one of those things, like you're saying before, people just thought it's about strength, get stronger, get more powerful. That's how you jump higher. And you absolutely do until
Mm-hmm.
you don't anymore. And then what, right? Is it just, well, I'm about as strong as I can get, so I should just stop training my jump? Like, no, you got some low hanging fruit there, right? The technique is the vehicle, the training is the engine. Put your engine in a better vehicle, it's going to perform better. So that's kind of how my
Beautiful
mind,
analogy.
right? It's how my mind has always looked at jumping. It's like, why put your big, powerful, beefy engine in a little like 1988 Ford Focus, right? Like, don't put it in that.
Yeah.
You want to put it in something that rips, right? So that's what we spent
Yeah.
some time doing. So that's immediate, probably 30 minutes to feel it. And then we're talking over the course of 6 weeks to 3 months or so before that's really starting to be something that's accessible within a game setting. Okay, so my primary population are volleyball players. And
Yeah.
volleyball players love to be able to just like they want to treat it largely as a band-aid, right? They're like, okay, I got to go work on my jump technique and just get it fixed up, and then I'll go back and I'll be perfect. When you realize that you do have to repeat those patterns and touch them. So to caveat into the question that you asked about should you always train technique, my answer is yeah, they should be married. Think about track and field, right? You know this. The best jumpers in the entire world still practice their basic technical elements on a
Yes,
weekly
yes,
basis, right? They're
yes.
not just like, I'm a
Mhm.
good long jumper now, so now I can just go hit the weight room, right?
It
Doesn't
never
work like
stops.
that. Nah,
Mm-mm.
never ever stops, because there's always zero point 0.01 more, 0.03 more that you can get out of your
Hmm.
body. It's just the changes might be incrementally smaller as you get more and more proficient in your career, but there are still
Yes.
changes that are there to be accomplished. So always work on it. That's why all my programs are woven with technique always. It's not just
Yeah.
like I have a technique day and then I have a training day. My training and technique they're married to each other.
Yeah, they're connected. You can see some improvements in technique within the first 30 minutes. When you see those improvements in technique, are those athletes also able to jump higher in within that 30 minutes just based off of the improvement in technique alone? Like maybe
Yes,
like
for
half an inch, you know?
yes. So that's one of those things. So what'll happen is when I get a new athlete in the gym, my first session, we'll call it an assessment session. I largely want to
Yeah,
take a look into like how they function right now. So I'm like, okay, I'll give you my gym. I want to see you warm up. Okay. Get
yeah,
yourself warm to the point where like you might be playing a game, or you're going to be able to jump at your maximum capacity. I don't put any restrictions on time. I'm like, go for it. And when you're ready, let me know.
yeah.
They'll let me know they're ready. We bring out the Vertex. So I got a vertical training tool, take their reach, kind of do the whole, treat it like a combine and get their reach. I want to see their standing jumps, their counter movement jump. How do you produce force, like fixed force without approach? And then I say, listen, show me your approach, and don't worry about it. Just have fun, jump in front of me. I let them jump a bunch until they can no longer hit anything. Okay. I want to make sure that
Yeah.
I want to make sure they've gassed out like their like their upper echelon of ability. And then
Hmm.
from there, I'm able to take some of the video that I've shot, provide a bit of context to the athlete, and say, listen, we're going to tackle these couple little points here. And I want to show you what it feels like to perform your jump at a higher level right now. And I mean, I I would say my success rate is somewhere in the ballpark of 90 to 95% within that first session of helping athletes find some additional potential. Um,
Hmm.
and I wish like it kind of sounds a bit too good to be true, but we've done this, like I've done this not only in this one-on-one setting, but I've done this with hundreds of people in workshops and camps over the course of 1 to 3 days, where we don't change anything other than a technical intervention, and
Yep.
it just produces. So yeah, technique is incredibly powerful, and I think what I've done is just developed a very unique feel and understanding for how to communicate it. And I think that's the difference. It's like I'm not reinventing jumping, right? I'm not
Hmm.
reinventing how to jump, but what I'm saying is, listen, like here's a framework, here's an understanding of it, and then for coaches, like I have a coaching certification. I teach coaches how to teach it to their athletes, and try to improve the language around jumping as far away from me as possible, spread it as far across the globe as I can.
You know, a lot of coaches also, to be honest, and I'm not trying to come at any coaches out there, but they also don't really understand proper jump technique. Like a basketball coach, he'll teach his athlete the drills, how to shoot a basketball, the layup, but just as important is the proper technique in both running and jumping. You know, if you improve an athlete's technique in jumping, that basketball player may get more rebounds now. He may score more points because he's jumping 2 or 3 inches higher than he previously was.
Right.
So I feel like that's a great thing because coaches also need training, right? And honestly, the proof of your work is on your Instagram page and everything else you do because like I said, I went there, I was checking it out. And as someone who loves technique, jumping, like I said earlier, I was also like, they have amazing technique. And another thing that I really noticed is that your athletes bring a lot of speed when they're jumping, they're not losing their momentum when they go to
Right.
jump. They're able to really quickly translate in from the penultimate or the approach into a vertical jump. So can we talk about the importance of bringing speed and maintaining speed
Yeah.
throughout your approach, basically the momentum, and how much of an impact that plays in terms of being able to really jump and get that vertical up?
Yeah. I mean, speed and momentum is really everything when it comes to talking about an approach jump, whether you're approaching in volleyball or the long jump runway. That's the only
Mm-hmm.
other variable we're gifted, right? We're gifted the variable of adding speed. And adding speed is only as good as your ability to control it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
more speed is good until it's not. There's like a diminishing return. So
Yes.
that's where we talk about establishing that maximum controlled velocity. One of the fastest and easiest ways to improve the amount of speed you carry through your takeoff is talking about the hip or vertical hip height displacement, or what the hips are doing in the actual horizontal approach, right? The more
Mm-hmm.
the hips rise and fall through that approach, the more we're creating kind of combative forces. So if I'm moving in this, right,
Mm-hmm.
quickest between 2 points is a straight line. The more I'm
Yeah.
above and below that vector, that line, the more deceleration I'm creating at those low points, right? As I lower, we're getting a little bit of deceleration. As we raise, we might be getting a bit of acceleration, but we're kind of battling this up and down flow of energy. So what we want to do is be able to establish our low point of our hips as we are leading in to that penultimate stride. So if we get to the low point a little bit earlier than people realize, then when it comes to planting those kind of last two contacts, whether it's 1 foot or 2 foot, you're not going to experience what's called late lowering, which is one of the most
Mm-hmm.
common pain points with athletes. And that's what you're seeing with my videos, is these 2 foot jumpers that are able to carry that speed through toe off. They're really just avoiding excessive late lowering. So it looks like they're off the ground quicker because they are, but they're not sacrificing the amount of power that they can drive into the ground because they're already at that low point when they're initiating
Yes.
that penultimate stride. So to me, acceleration is managing hip displacement, and then also developing more feel for your jump and when it's important to accelerate versus when it's important to cruise or coast. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that's, I think that those are the easiest things to start with.
Yeah, that's very interesting because you spoke about how too much speed can be a bad thing.
Correct.
Now, in terms of 2 foot jumping, I would have to agree with that because if you're trying to bring a lot of speed, like the more speed you have, a lot of times the less control you have as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely agree with that. Now, another thing I've seen with your athletes is the arms. Now, the arms, they have wonderful arm movements, and what people don't realize is the arms, they probably contribute 15 to 20% of your jump height. So, can we talk about how arm movement is important and how you also work on that? Also, why do you think a lot of athletes don't really ever think about arms when it comes to improving their vertical jump?
I think like athletes probably battle a lot of the various information that's floating around the internet, right? Where people focus in
Hmm.
and fixate on one area. You know, there's a lot of there are a lot of we'll call pseudo experts that are kind of around the globe that are doing their best to educate, but at the same time don't necessarily have that understanding. So it's possible that they omit some areas or maybe just don't fully understand them enough to communicate them. So I don't fault people
Hmm.
for trying their best, but I wish that people would seek out people who have done this for multiple years and have a firm system and
Yes.
understanding. So that's what I think in terms of why people aren't teaching it. That being said, arms are very important. I think I want to reframe how people think about their arms a little bit. You know, in 2 foot
Hmm.
jumping, um, in track and field and high jump, we call it the arm swing, right? We call it like
Hmm.
arms back, arms forward. I think what's happened is the arm swing has created um, so when we're talking jumping, I speak in terms of what are called jump behaviors, right? So when I give you a cue,
Hmm.
it's my cue is to help you elicit a specific behavior in a very specific
Yeah.
way, right? If I tell you to swing your
Hmm.
arms, your natural instinct is going to be to swing them back and swing them forward. In jumping,
Yeah.
what we know conclusively is the arms don't only contribute to horizontal swinging, but they contribute to a kind of a depression moment where they actually strike downward toward the
Mm-hmm.
ground as part of that. We'll call it swinging action. So the easiest way to get the arms to contribute more to the jump is not to get them further back, but it's actually to
Mm-hmm.
try to synchronize them a little bit more with the contact of our last foot or our block foot. And when we
Mm-hmm.
can synchronize those actions to be striking the ground at the same angle at relatively the same time, we encourage a greater muscular impulse. So there's actually a greater return from the ground, which is what you're talking about in terms of contributing this, like, 10, 15, 20% extra output to a jump. It's really just when those pieces are aligned and they connect, we get this
Mm-hmm.
additional return energy from the ground. So I do have drills that I utilize to help athletes develop that more intuitive connection point and timing of the arms. And I think that's what we see with arms is sometimes it's less about like the length of the arm swing and more about the timing and when it's actually contributing to the jump that's causing the big problem.
One thing I try to focus on is also making sure like my shoulders are strong enough to really help with basically the movements of my arm and really contribute to the overall jump. So earlier on, what you said, when you train, technique is part of your training. So even if I'm assuming lifting weights or squatting or whatever it may be, now how do you incorporate technique and strength training together?
Yeah. There's a couple different ways you can do this, right? So sometimes I will use it as part of our warm up flow. So I might have, depending if we're going to be doing some jumping that day, I might have people pattern some of their drills early in a session just to kind of build some of
Mm-hmm.
that contractile history, some of the history in the body. Other times, what I will do is when I program is I'll create program complexes. So a grouping of a few movements together that might progress along we call like a velocity curve, right? So we go from something a little bit heavier into something a little bit lighter, but that we can move faster, and then into something that's highly neurological and very quick. That highly
Yes.
very quick movement oftentimes is a technical drill. So I might have people patterning an aspect of their approach. I might have people working on that connection point between their hands and their block foot using some of the drills that we use here. So I look at jump technique drills and interventions as just interchangeable exercises to be able to use within it, because there's physical output. So like, why
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't it be something that can be included in a physical output of a workout in the
Correct.
weight room, right? Why does it have to be separate? It can be separate, don't get me wrong, but I want people to get in the habit of performing technical actions while under stress and fatigue as well, so that when they get into their game setting or they're competing, they're used to being efficient when not at their optimal kind of physicality.
When you're playing basketball, doing track, volleyball, eventually your body starts to fatigue. And
Right.
that's when we revert back to our natural states basically, and our techniques start falling apart. That's when injuries can occur. Now, for you, when it comes to injuries and technique, how do you think they interact with one another? Is that the better the technique, the less likelihood of injury, or does it really not matter?
I think partly yes and partly no. I mean, injuries, it really depends how you want to define injuries. Some are catastrophic and
Hmm.
unavoidable, right? You can't, like, we can train just like in the weight room, right? You can put people in a position where they have more stable ankles and lower limbs. And, if they get themselves in a position where they catch an edge, maybe they're stronger, or maybe they have just a bit more exposure to those ranges of motion, and they don't necessarily get injured. But if it's a catastrophic injury, if you jump and land on someone's foot, I don't care how strong your ankles are, it's
Yeah.
going to go. It's going to go.
Yeah.
But if you've trained the joints in such a way that they've experienced inversion and eversion and high degrees of flexion and extension under load, then what's going to happen is your body will actually repair itself quicker and more intuitively. So your return to sport tends to be faster. When we're talking technique, the more efficient you are, okay, the
Hmm.
more intuitive decisions you will make in a dynamic environment to avoid injury. And it will happen very quickly. But again, we can't avoid all catastrophic situations. So
Of
one of
course.
the best points of having more efficient jump technique in my opinion, is because you've created a higher level of efficiency, now your worst jumps are better than your best jumps used to be. So we've just, instead of raising just the ceiling, what we've done is we've elevated the floor to a point now where you're always going to be able to access what you used to only be able to access every now and then. And that to me is true vertical jump potential and gain. It's not the upper echelon jump that you get every now and then. It's the average of all my jumps is higher than it's ever been. And to me, that's the case of, that's the benefit to it from a sport perspective. And that's also something that will contribute to hopefully reducing the likelihood of injury, because your body is absorbing forces in a more efficient way.
If you have good technique, chances are you're doing a great job of avoiding those type of injuries. But of course, yes, there's always, injuries are part of the game. Unfortunately, they can't be avoided, but you can work on trying your best to avoid them. So another thing, like thinking back on injuries and technique is like strength training. Now, for you, how important is strength training? And also, what are the major muscle groups that you really try to focus on?
Well, strength training is exceptionally important. It's one of these things where I don't separate the two. I might speak more about jump technique because it's the niche that I've grown to kind of be the voice of. So I think it's important that I continue to educate in that field. But when athletes are in the lab here, I mean, we're still talking progressive strength training. It just might look different than some people have traditionally done in the past. I personally use 80 to 90% single limb movements, meaning we don't spend a lot of time doing heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, but we do get under heavy weight. But I do it in a very unilateral fashion, simply because the demands of sport are almost never bilaterally, right? It's very infrequent that you get yourself in a position where your feet are directly under your hips and directly under your shoulders. Football, maybe a little bit more often on the line, maybe a little bit more like compact power. But in basketball, volleyball, track, it's all single limb movements, tons of rotation, tons of proprioceptive requirements, right? Your body in space with people around you, with balls flying around. So I'd rather get people used to creating and controlling forces in a unilateral fashion, because there's a lot of feedback it gives to the entire body. So when you talk about like, what do I focus on body parts? I mean, I'm trying to make better athletes, right? Better athlete makes a better jumper, and an athlete requires the entirety of their system to be taxed in some way. I might utilize, 20 to 30 movements more frequently than others, but realistically, every single exercise is just a tool. And the more experience you have, the more access you have to like specific tools on the fly. So I don't have rigid parameters around my programming. I'll have a loose idea of what we want to get done that day. But when an athlete walks in the gym, if they're in the middle of season, I'm going to say, first of all, like, how are you feeling? How are you feeling today? If they're like, I'm gassed, like I'm so tired, I had a tournament all weekend and it's Monday. Hey, that day might not necessarily look like strength training. That day might be a little bit more about movement, nurturing the nervous system. I use a lot of reaction time training, light stimulation. So I use a lot of blaze pod action, which I'm really stoked about. So sometimes it might just be getting their brain to fire a little bit that day. And that's what they need, right, for that situation. So strength training, super duper important. That's the basis of athletic performance training is progressively being more relatively strong. But from an efficiency and skill standpoint, technique, they're married entirely, so that as you get stronger and your muscles might integrate a bit differently, well, the technique comes along with that. So it's not like you get really strong and now all of a sudden you move a bit different, you have to relearn technique. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's just got to always be there.
No, yes, of course. If you're getting stronger, if I'm squatting, and I get my squat up to like 350, and this whole time I have not done a single vertical jump technique work, like I might be able to jump higher, but I'm leaving so much off the table by not working on the technique. What's like at that point, what's the point of all the strength that I've just gained if I can't really translate it into sports or into jumping? So
Exactly.
that makes a lot of sense. Now another thing that I often see, especially when it comes to like training for strength, is the lack of core core strength. Can you touch on how important core is when it comes to jumping, especially like technique, and how that works for an athlete? Because it really works as a stabilizer. You know, if you're going to jump and you're trying to get into your jump technique, if you have a weak core, you know, things can start breaking down. Like your hips might break down because you have a weak core, or you're not able to properly, you know, move up the kinetic chain with your arms and bringing the energy up with you because your core is once again breaking down. So can you touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably one of the main reasons why, when I talked about doing a lot of single limb movements, um,
Mm-hmm.
is that the demand it places on the structure of the midline and the core becomes exponentially higher the more you have to, we'll call, balance and stabilize naturally to perform the movement. So if I throw someone
Mm-hmm.
into a Bulgarian split squat and I say, listen, like, we're going to gas the legs up, they're also kind of unknowingly stabilizing a lot of lateral flexion,
Mm-hmm.
rotation, depending on where they're getting into, which in terms of jumping, like you're saying, it's a stabilizer of the spine, but it's also
Yes.
it's also a locomotor of the spine as well. So to be able to like rotate through high velocities requires not only strength and power, but it requires the ability to resist, brake, and return that energy. So, you know, being able to resist force and produce force becomes of the utmost important. And that midline, or the core, really, like, we're talking like sternum to like
Mm-hmm.
hips, right? We're talking, there's a lot going on in the core. I think people's understanding of the core is like, you know, abs and obliques, things they can see. But I mean, we have diaphragm and pelvic floor and the insides of the obliques, things that are deep tissues that you don't visually see, that get worked in ways that are less traditional gym exercises. So they're much more about holding, creating positions, and stabilizing through movement. So yeah, core. I mean, core is, it's a must, and it's not always done in the visual way that a lot of people think.
Mm-hmm. So essentially, performing the jump itself is working your core,
Correct.
or
Correct.
performing the like squatting, doing lunges, all of those are working the core because now you're really forcing yourself to stabilize your upper body and your lower body, especially when you have some heavy weight on your shoulders, right? So you're really integrating like natural functional movements in order to get the results that you want when it comes to jumping. So everything is working together as one piece.
Yeah, I try to think of training in the sense of, there are multiple tools that perform the same task or have the same task in mind. Every coach is going to find what they're comfortable with, what has worked for them. I've done everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've personally trained under barbells. I personally trained through, you know, dumbbell work and elastic and resistance band work and body weight. Like, I've done all of it to try to affect my body. And to me, it's really a combination of everything that makes the most sense. Is that, why do we have to pick just one way, or why do we have to pick just one exercise? The concept of what's the best vertical, or what's the best exercise for my vertical jump, is a very difficult one to answer. It's also something that I don't think necessarily needs to be asked, because at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
the jumpers that, like, as we've gotten better at jumpers and high level jumpers, what we've realized, it's just consistently putting in work, right? Stimulating and stressing the body, and continuing to do your skill, or your, whether it's a jump, or whether it's playing basketball or playing volleyball. That's how I was able to jump my highest, right? In my prime, I had a 48-inch vertical. It was not small. It was something that I worked incredibly hard toward. I did have some, we'll call it, more natural tendency to be able to jump, but I
Mm-hmm.
added about a foot of vertical over 2 years through the
Wow.
combination of training and technique. And I was very thankful that I was able to use myself as a bit of a uh, lab experiment, we'll call it, to be
Yes.
able to figure out what worked for me and what didn't. And then over the course of my career, same thing with my athletes: what works for them, what doesn't. And it's a really a troubleshooting game.
Yeah, that's I mean that if you said a foot of on your vertical in 2 years.
Yeah, almost. It was about 11 inches. Yeah, in 2 years.
Yeah, man, that is very impressive. Oftentimes, when you go on the internet, you see promises. I can add 6 to 8 inches on your vertical jump in 3 months.
Mhm.
And automatically I'm like, that's not going to happen. Like
I hate it. Yeah,
yeah, I'm like, in 3 months, you might get 4 inches if you're like a complete beginner. But to
right.
say, 6 to 8 inches, that is extreme. So just on average, so like the people watching are better educated on this, and they're not seeing these things online, and having these ideas in their heads when they're not seeing the results that are they're basically being promised. So on average, how many inches do athletes add within 6 months on their vertical
That's a
jump?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to kind of like piggyback up what you're saying, I don't guarantee anything. Like what I
Yeah.
guarantee is that if you come in and work with me, you'll be a better athlete. That might look like your vertical goes up. That might look like you become more stable and more balanced and quicker. But at
Hmm.
the end of the day, I don't guarantee that. That being said, I have never had anybody that's seen me that hasn't improved their vertical a little bit. And it's
Hmm.
again building efficiency. So anybody that comes in and sees me, it really depends too, like on how much is that athlete contributing over the course of 6 months. In a perfect vacuum,
Yes.
if they were to do everything I said for 6 months, and they were a relatively athletic individual that came in to see me, we're probably talking over the course of 6 months somewhere between like 3 to 7 inches. Like it's really going to
That's
be a sliding scale, right? So
hmm
I can't say I can guarantee. And this is the tough thing. It's marketing, right? At the end of the day, people are trying to get you to buy their
marketing.
stuff. But
Yeah, it's marketing.
and I use marketing as well, but I try to be a little bit more specific. Hey, up to, right? Gain up to 6 inches in 3 months. I've had
Hmm.
people gain 6 inches in 3 months, but that's usually from the progressive strength training element. Like they're coming in as an untrained or vastly undertrained individual, and all of a sudden
Hmm.
their muscles have tone to them again, and their joints are stable. And then they're like, "Oh my gosh, I can jump 6 inches higher." Well, of course you can, right? Your body is more assembled at the end of 6 months than it is at the start.
Yes.
But to guarantee inches, I think is irresponsible. I can give educated guesses, and I always tell that to parents because they'll go like, "Well, how much? When do you think they'll be able to touch 10 feet, or when do you think like how long will it take to this?" And I said, "Listen, this is an ongoing journey. There's no
Hmm.
termination date, and I think people need to spend a lot less time trying to put a termination date on their goal. I need to gain 6 inches in 1 year. Like, okay, why? And if you don't, did you fail? Right? If you didn't gain 6 inches in a year, should you stop? No, absolutely not. Right? The athletes go for multiple years through their career. Some athletes peak after 30. So
Yeah.
if you stop because you are disappointed with the fact that a program guarantees you six and you only got four, that's not an L. That's not an L at
No,
all.
that's
You
a
gained 4 inches. That's huge.
dude. The the thing is that someone who's been working on their vertical jump since high school, like 4 inches is ridiculous.
It's
You know what?
astronomically high.
That is a massive improvement. You start getting very small incremental improvements. After a while, you're getting maybe half an inch, and trust me, like after a while, those half an inch is amazing, right? Like for me, the first time I ever tested my vertical jump was 10th grade, and I really had so I had like a natural propensity for jumping,
Right.
and I was 10th grade, and I got 29 inches off a standstill vertical jump. Then I really started working on it. And from 10th grade to the time I graduated high school, I added about 7 inches because by the time
That's
I left,
huge.
I had a 36-inch vertical jump. But it took 2 years. And another aspect of that is I have never really trained for it. So I also had a lot of beginner gains.
Right.
And so, you know, like you said, now if somebody's completely untrained, you're going to see, massive improvements, and you're going to see it fairly quickly. But if you're someone that's intermediate or advanced, those improvements, they become a lot slower and a lot lower. But that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean your hard work is not getting you anywhere. It just means that now it's taking longer because your body has adapted so much to your training stimulus to now it does, you're basically almost reaching your genetic potential at a certain point. And I think that's important to really put that out there, just to let people know, like, hey, like, you're not always going to get 3 inches, you're not always going to get 6 inches, but just keep working at it. It's something
Yeah.
that's just going to improve you as an athlete.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the focus needs to be much less on the top end number going up and much more on that bottom number going up. So that we're talking
Yeah.
about, especially with these intermediate and advanced level athletes, like you're saying, moving the needle even a quarter inch or a half inch for someone that is closer to their complete potential or the complete ceiling of potential, or we'll call it complete natural ceiling of potential, then
Mm-hmm.
we have to, the focus and the perspective has to shift much more to the efficiency side of things, right? So it's going to be, hey, listen, this work for you is going to make it so that when you're like 6 games deep, you
Mm-hmm.
still feel like you have access to your body, right? You
Yes.
still
Yeah.
feel like you have
Mm-hmm.
access to the things that make you who you are. And that's where the focus needs to be. One of my favorite things with training is the human psychology side of things. That's, I think, where I'm most fascinated with. How do you get the
Mm-hmm.
most out of each individual person, but more so, how do you create a really balanced perspective for each of the athletes that you deal with? Because at the end of the day, our job as coaches, trainers, strength coaches is to be part of a network of people that help athletes navigate the journey of being an athlete. Okay, and we know firsthand from being an athlete, there's much more to the picture than just sessions in the weight room and sessions on the court or on the track. There's way
Yes.
more to
Yes.
that. What are you doing in between that? How are you taking care of yourself? How are you managing your mental health? Right? When you're doing well, you feel great. When you're doing poorly, you don't feel good. And are you able to get yourself out of those spirals? Right? So I've focused much more in the later stages of my career as I've gotten more experience on helping the athletes manage that journey.
I find it great that you really spoke about the mental aspects of training and competing. Do you do mental framework work with your athletes, how they can build a better mental capacity for the training, better mental outlook for performance? Is that something you work on, or does it just come naturally from your training with them on their physical aspects?
Um, yes, I definitely do spend time helping. Sorry about that. I'm coming over a cold too, so I'm trying. We're
No,
holding it
it's
together. We're holding it
okay.
together. I don't want to be that guy that's like, okay.
No, trust me, it's okay.
Uh, right from the get go, when people get into the gym, it's, I think, largely about the environment. Okay, so one of the big
Yeah.
things that I try to create in my gym is a very like nurturing and safe environment. I work largely with female athletes as well. So, female and male athletes on a whole, not everybody, on a whole, tend to thrive in slightly different environments and situations. So for me, it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's very important that this environment is something that feels safe, something that feels nurturing, not only to the physical side of things, but also to the emotional and mental side of things. I'm very comfortable with being vulnerable with my athletes. Okay. Like I have no
Mm-hmm.
problem sharing my history, my past, my experiences, which run deep. And there's a lot of things that people would be very surprised to hear about me that have contributed to my life and who I am at this point. So I try
Mm-hmm.
to be accessible to my athletes on an emotional wavelength as well, to be somebody that's maybe not a parent or not a teacher, someone they don't see all the time, and letting them know that I got you. If you need me, I'm here. So safety in the environment is number one. Number two, little drills and exposures to visualization drills, breathing. Teach them how to do rudimentary box breathing, which is essentially meditative yoga breathing.
Mm-hmm.
That's constantly their anchor point, right? I deal with athletes that fall on a range of performance anxiety, and that's something
Mm-hmm.
that I
Yes.
dealt. That's something I dealt with. Was I
Yeah.
was a bit more of an anxious athlete. I was a fairly talented athlete, but I also managed high levels of anxiety that I had to figure out how to deal with. And at the time when you're in it, it's much harder to have perspective because you're swallowed by
Yes.
it. Like there's this
100%.
impending weight, right? Everything feels, life or death, now or never. It has to happen or I failed. Like there's all these expectations you've created. There's expectations your network has created for you. There's expectations that your parents and family has placed on you, or at
Mm-hmm.
least perceived expectations that when you're younger, it's very difficult to sift through that stuff because everything
It's
seems
hard.
very important, right? Everything seems
It's
important.
hard.
Your world, your
Mm-hmm.
life exists within the 14, 16, 18 years that you've been on planet Earth. Uh, it's thankfully quite relieving as you get a bit older that you can look back and have those moments to go like, I am going to do my best to help people understand the reality of those moments
Mm-hmm.
in the framework of your life. And I spend a lot of time trying to help athletes gain that perspective. And I think that's been the biggest win in my career is I still have athletes that I worked with over a decade ago at times reach out to say what's up, check in with me, let me know what they got going on in their lives, ask questions. And when I hear that I've been a small part in helping someone find who they are a little bit more, like
Yeah. Yeah.
to me that is way more important than any inch, half inch, 5 inch, 10 inch gain
Yes.
in a vertical jump. So no, I absolutely do spend time and put a lot of stock into the mental, emotional health side of things in training.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, everything you said, I've experienced personally. I know a lot of time coaches can really be important figures in our lives. You spoke about how athletes reach out to you and talk to you after 10 years. And that's because you built a relationship with them. Even like for me, I still reach out to my high school jump coach after
Mm-hmm.
10 years, right? I still talk to him and I still like, hey, like, do you need help with something? I can come help you coach your current athletes because he was such a important person and in my life at that time. So coaches are, it's not, you really build solid relationships with the athletes that you coach. And you also spoke about performance anxiety. That was something that I really experienced when I was running. And earlier on I said I sucked at running, but the truth was I just got in my head every single meet. At practice, I would be by far, and I'm not trying to like talk myself up here,
Yeah.
by far the best like distance runner we had. And I would, dominate all of the practices, but we get into competition and I was the worst person on the team. And this was consistent. And that was because like days before the meet, I would just be thinking about it. Oh my God, what if I do bad? Oh my God, what if like I come in last? And I would have so much anxiety at the starting line, my legs would be shaking.
Yeah.
And
Heavy.
my legs always, huh?
They feel heavy. Like
Yes,
they feel like they don't belong to you.
exactly. And so it's like that. It's like my legs were already burning before racing, and so when like I'm 10 meters in, my legs feel like they're burning already, and I'm like, oh my God, I have half a mile to run, or I have 3 miles to run, and that was all because of performance anxiety, right? And
Right.
that's one of the reasons why I switched to jumping because I'm like, all I have to do is just run in the straight line and jump. I don't have to
Yeah.
worry about yeah, I don't have to worry about somebody watching me basically fail at this event that I'm doing, right? It's over quickly. I'm really happy that that's something that you work on, and that's not something a lot of coaches do anymore. They don't work on the mental aspects of performance. You can have the best athlete in the world, but if hey, game day comes around,
Yeah.
he or she is completely psyched out, all the hard work you've been putting in, and it's even more stressful for the athlete. It's not really going to get anywhere. So that's something that has, that needs to be focused on when it comes to training. It's just as important as the physical aspect. So what are some of the challenges, that you see athletes face a lot when they come to you?
Okay. I mean, there's a variety, right? I think when people come in initially, the challenges they're facing are much more superficial.
Mm-hmm.
They maybe they're a shorter athlete on their team. That's typically what I'll get is that, emails from parents going, I got a short kid and they play volleyball. I need you to help them. And it's like, okay, tell me more. They're short. Or, they come in and it's a matter of, I want to be able to move faster on the floor and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
When I get them in the lab and we spend a little bit of time together, kind of off the back end of what we were just talking about, a lot of the issues that people are having or those hurdles that people are facing are much more self-imposed. They're much more
Yeah.
self-imposed. Anything can work in performance. Really, like if you're doing something consistently over a long enough period of time, things are going to change and you will make progress. Okay, some things help
Yes.
that progress line be a little steeper, a little quicker, and some don't. But ultimately, if you're doing something, you're going to get better. When athletes come in here, my focus is much more on figuring out a little bit more about like who this person is, what's going
Mm-hmm.
on outside of the gym that's maybe causing them to have an issue with progressing beyond this point. And you mentioned it really quickly. You said something that I think people need to remember is you said, I was so afraid of failing and losing, right? That my legs felt like they didn't belong to me and I felt jello-y. Anxiety is really just that. It's a fear of failure combined with like a variety of things that you can't physically control, right? Things are out of your control
Yeah.
because they have not happened yet. So we then have this like linear one track frame of mind that tries to go through all of the situations in which things can go wrong, thinking that
Yes.
we're essentially preparing ourselves for that. But all we're doing is we are disturbing the natural flow of electricity. And that's why you're talking about feeling almost like your legs are burning or heavy, is that elevated anxiety is elevated cortisol levels in the body. When
Yes.
cortisol levels are elevated, it makes the communication between brain and neuromuscular system much slower. So you actually aren't as explosive, fast, or athletic when your anxiety is very, very high. So that's where elements of that breathing come into play, where you can kind of calm the nervous system down
Mm-hmm.
so you can refeel your legs again and you can do what
Yes.
you do so well in practice, because in practice there's no pressure there. You're not imposing
Mm-hmm.
pressure. Amongst your teammates that you are the best there, so it's like, okay, I'm already the best here. But then once you've established that and you realize that you're going into a population and a pool of people you've never met, I don't know if I'm the best there, and I have this reputation amongst my core group of friends that I'm the best. If I lose here, that's going to affect my relationship with this core
Something.
group, and therefore it changes who I am and my value. And you start to put heavier and heavier
Mm-hmm.
weight on things that in reality most people don't really care about, right? They
Oh my
People like you because you're you, and whether or not you get first or 15th or 30th, they might make a comment like, what happened? Hey, you'd be like, I wasn't on my game today. That's cool.
yeah.
You learn from that. So those changes in my gym and the problems with athletes, I think, are much deeper than the superficial problems of just wanting to be able to jump higher.
No, that is so beautifully well said, because it's not even something that, when you're young, that you even think about on a conscious level, but subconsciously, right? You spoke about how, like in my own experience, I was like at practice, I was the best. Everyone knew it, right?
Mhm.
But then we get to the meet, like all my teammates beat me, and then now that you mention it, it's like I was also worried about how they viewed me.
Correct.
Who like is like, this guy at practice is good, but then we come to the meets and like he's not doing anything.
Right.
So that's something that we have to think about more as athletes, and especially the breath work. Now I know that there's a lot of different type of breath works out there that help reduce anxiety,
Mhm.
and that's something that you help your athletes with, right?
Mhm.
That's a technique that they use when they go to their competitions, their game day, that they incorporate when they're feeling nervous or having anxiety, and that in turns also improves their performance, because they're not
Correct.
going out there with jello legs. They're not going out there worried. They might be nervous, but maybe it's more excited nervousness where it's helping them in competition rather than, you know, making things worse for them in competition. So that's something that's, you know, great. I guess a question for that is just how many times a week do you have your athletes do breath work?
Oh, they're doing breath work every day. I mean, breath work, I think, is
Every
something
day.
that I teach them how to do it and then reinforce the importance of that becoming part of your day.
Yeah.
Anytime, anytime there's a lot of variables at play, whether you're
Mm-hmm.
in the gym and around a lot of athletes or on the court, or whether you're just out and about and in crowds of people, for me, like
Yes.
my anxiety extends. Like I have clinical anxiety that I'm much more aware of now, and I'm able to use elements of it as a strength now. But I recognize
Mm-hmm.
that, when I get into big crowded situations and I don't know people, that my anxiety goes super high. So
Yeah.
teaching people, whether or not someone's anxiety is that high or whether they just experience anxiety every now and then, that they
Mm-hmm.
recognize, breath work every day. It's like meditation. That's what I introduce athletes to right away, is just this idea of really short, manageable bouts of meditation that teaches
Mm-hmm.
this kind of box breathing variation. So 4 seconds in through the nose,
Mm-hmm.
4 second hold, 4 second exhale, and the visualization is 4 seconds, 4 seconds, 4 seconds, four
Mm-hmm.
seconds, forming this box, right? But yeah, every day, at least having a moment where you take 5 box breaths.
Mm-hmm.
um, when people are starting out, it'll feel like a chore, like something that they have to do. So it's best
Yeah.
to put it in a position where it's like scheduled, or maybe right before bed, or right in the morning. Those are great times to explore a little bit of that breath work. But man, there is an incredible power to feeling more at ease with these like imposed expectations and all this different stuff that kind of comes up. Like, here's what I tell people: what a privilege it is to have
Mm-hmm.
anxiety over playing a sport. Like, what a privilege that is, to be able to be like, wow, I'm so nervous about playing this game I'm about to play. Some
Mm-hmm.
people are pretty nervous about other things that are
Yeah.
vastly more we'll call it important, or carry a lot more weight. But when someone
Yes.
comes to me and goes, I got so much nerves when I'm going to serve a ball, and I'm in front of the crowd and all this stuff. What a privilege. You get a
It is.
stage to be able to showcase all of your hard work
Yeah.
that you've been doing, and knowing
Mm-hmm.
that not only are the moments that are you're successful in are important, but the moments that you struggle are just as important to to um, to cementing the person who you are. How do you
Yes. Yeah.
deal with adversity? You need to expose yourself to those settings. They're not easy, but wow, are they rewarding? Hey, like when you step away from those moments and you're able to look back and go, holy shit, like I just did something that made me so uncomfortable and I got through it and I'm here. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
an experience and a half that you will always remember.
Yes, because it makes you stronger. Just not just in terms of sports, but just in life. Generally speaking, once you're able to do hard things, especially like you said, going out and serving a ball. Like I also played volleyball in high school, right? And that was also another area, especially serving.
Yeah.
You're
Everybody's
by
looking at you.
yourself. Yeah, you're like by yourself. Is like I don't want to mess this up, especially like when the game is on the line, right? It's like, but when you take those moments and you're able to actually do it and come out of it, you know, in life you just get more confident. You become more confident in life because you're like, look, I've struggled before in this area and I was able to overcome it. So now when we have real life situations happening, it's like you trust yourself. You believe that you can also overcome that real life situation because you've done it so many times in front of so many people. You're able to just zone in, focus on what you have to do and get it done. So I you know, I really, you know, to be honest, when we started the interview, the mental aspect was not something that I really thought we are going to head towards. But I'm really happy that we did because it's so critical. It's just critical, and that's the thing I love about sports because you know getting mentally stronger also relates to life in general. and sports really
100%.
help in that sense. Now, Coach, we're about to close out the interview, but I do want to ask you, where can athletes reach you?
Yeah,
Maybe
absolutely. I think,
your Instagram, website, whatever it may be, TikTok.
yeah, easiest way for people to reach me is Instagram at Jump Guy Ty. That's the most active account I'm on. Plus, it houses like all of my programs and everything. So I have a
Mm-hmm.
subscription on my Instagram account. It's really inexpensive. It's like $5 a month right now, but you get access to
Mm-hmm.
like all my drills and programs. So there's full training programs that you get access to when you pay $5 a month. I have a TikTok as well. It's Jump Guy Tyler. I post some of the same stuff from Instagram to TikTok. There's a bit of a following there, but at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, Instagram's become like my hub, my platform, and yeah, come on, check out Jump Guy Ty. Um, Follow me, send me messages, ask me some questions. If you're into it, if you're really into being a better athlete, spend the $5 and jump on
Yeah.
board. Right? It's like don't get a coffee one month and learn some stuff. And you know what? If you don't like it, it's not for you. It's not for you. But I have yet to have anybody take off. Try to really ensue my passion into everybody that I work with, and I'm hopeful for that to continue down the road. But I appreciate you having me on, man. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, man. And for anyone watching, like I said, he has amazing work on his page. So make sure you go check it out. I'll make sure to leave a link in the description of your Instagram, and I'll also put the name on the screen as I edit the video. So guys, make sure you check it out because I've seen it. I'm a coach myself, and he does amazing, amazing work. And man, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it, Tyler.
It's been my pleasure, man. And just a quick word to you: keep doing what you're doing. You're reaching people, and you're doing what you love, and that's something that like that's how I started. Right? You just do what you love,
Hmm.
and you find your tribe, and people find you that need you, and you just keep serving. So I'm proud of what you're doing this far, man. You keep it up.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. I'm definitely going to stay at it, man.
Awesome.
My goal is to educate as much as I possibly can, and having guys like you who are very knowledgeable not only helps me because I learn so much from guys like you, but it's also helping somebody out, even if it's just one person.
Yeah.
That goes a long way. So, thank you so much.
Appreciate you, man. Thanks.